My name is Milena Cromie. I'm our PR and communications manager at QGive. I am subbing in for Wendy Mercurio today. She usually hosts our thought leadership webinars, but she is out on maternity leave. Some brief housekeeping tips. We are recording today's content, so everyone who is registered will receive an email tomorrow with the recording, slides, and a few other resources. And of course, feel free to ask questions. We do have a Q&A box on our Zoom settings. So if you have a question as Mallory's going through content, just go ahead, type your question in there, and we'll get to it at the end of the presentation. And of course, follow us on social media. Mallory is very active on LinkedIn, and so is QGive. We would love to hear from you, any takeaways that you had from today's content. And a little bit about us before I hand things over to Mallory. If you're not familiar, QGive is an online fundraising platform. We provide digital fundraising tools to over 6,500 nonprofits in the US and Canada, including donation forms, event registration forms, and auction tools and more. We recently joined the Bloomerang family to provide an all-in-one giving platform that puts relationships at the heart of fundraising. If you're curious or want to learn more about what that's like, I'd encourage you to just go to the QGive website. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Mallory.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be with you all today. I'm going to override and have my screen share going. But thank you so much. So grateful to the whole QGive team, Milena and everyone for having me today to go over this with you. I mentioned in one of my posts on LinkedIn that I actually started one of my biggest first fundraising roles involved a ton of peer-to-peer. So this is like bringing me way back. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Mallory Erickson, and I, like so many of you, became an accidental fundraiser, actually first as a managing director and then as an executive director, where I'd come up through the program side and then all of a sudden found myself in these roles with big fundraising responsibilities. And I had a lot of dreams about what that was going to look like, that I was going to be this empowered and confident fundraiser, and I was going to be having donors come to me, and I wasn't going to be overworking and all these things. But the reality was quite different. And I call this my impact report fake phase, where I was working 12 to 15-hour days. I didn't have a donor pipeline that I trusted. I was prioritizing my organization over my friends, my family, my health, and I was really miserable and really got to this moment in my career where I was like, I think I might need to leave the nonprofit sector. But I had this combination of incredible life experiences. I got certified as an executive coach, trained in habit and behavior design and design thinking, and those frameworks came together and fundamentally changed the way that I fundraise. It is the combination of those elements that's behind the Power Partners formula. That's my signature program, and everything that we're talking about today is from the learnings that are inside of there. So really this combination of executive coaching, modern fundraising strategy, habit and behavior design, and design thinking. So for those of you who are here, I mean, you probably know what peer-to-peer is because you're here on this webinar, but I wanted to just start sort of like calibrating for all of us what peer-to-peer really is, right? It's a method of fundraising where individuals engage their networks, families, colleagues, and acquaintances to help raise money for a cause, okay? And so this method really leverages the power of social networks and personal relationships to increase reach and donations. So I talk in all of my work around sort of different ways of finding alignment between your organization and different donor groups, different supporter groups. And so it's really important to understand the type of alignment that peer-to-peer fundraising is really rooted in, right? For the participants, for the peer-to-peer fundraisers themselves. At the end of the day, peer-to-peer fundraising is about connection. And so one of the initial things that I always talk about in my work is this idea of what gets in the way of our ability to connect and what creates connection. And when it comes to fundraising, one of the things that really gets in the way of our ability to connect, both between you and your organization and those participants, those peer-to-peer fundraisers, and the peer-to-peer fundraisers and their networks, are the thoughts and the beliefs that they're holding about money and about value and worth and asking for things, right? Those elements are so layered for us as humans, and they're related to a lot of different things in our own lives, in society, in the stigma around fundraising, and they can really impact the way that we feel fundraising, the way that we feel asking our peer-to-peer participants to reach out to their own networks, and then ultimately how they feel doing that outreach. And so as we talk about these concepts today, I was saying to Milena before we hit record, it's like a little bit meta. I'm going to be teaching you all strategies around how to build connection between you and your peer-to-peer participants, how to really engage your supporters to become advocates and fundraisers for your organization. And the things that I'm teaching you are what you can also teach them in terms of how they're reaching out to their networks and their community and inspiring generosity for the cause that they care about. So there are like these two kind of concentric layered circles here that always apply to the concepts that we're going to go over today. So when I started to really look at this is called a cognitive loop, the way that my thoughts and beliefs impacted how I felt about fundraising, and then ultimately how I showed up. When I started to look at this for myself and I started to feel like, oh, I feel uncomfortable fundraising, right? Something about, I feel this resistance. I feel like it's really hard to ask people to do one more thing or contribute again, or I don't want to, reach out to the same people that I did before. What was rooted in that were thoughts and beliefs that fundraising was about hounding people for money, that it was about asking people to do something that they really didn't want to do. And those thoughts and those beliefs made me understandably uncomfortable to fundraise, right? But when I started to look at, okay, is that what I really believe good fundraising is about? Is that what I really believe is rooted in this invitation to participate in something I care about? And no, the reality was no, that great fundraising, good fundraising is really not an ask, it's an offer. And this thought and this belief starting to shift for me started to really change how I felt as a fundraiser and ultimately how I behaved as a fundraiser. And so whether you're inspiring your peer-to-peer participants or you're helping them inspire their networks, really rooting them in this belief that inviting people to be a part of this is an offer, it's an opportunity, can really change the tone and the engagement strategies that everybody is using. Your energy is contagious. Your energy in terms of how you're talking to and exciting your participants is contagious. Their energy is contagious in terms of how they're engaging their networks and community. Energy is contagious, and it starts with us. And so we're going to talk about some different strategies to help you kind of focus and harness your energy today. But this is just one of the things I want you to start to understand. Because donor behavior, when we're talking about peer-to-peer fundraising, right, we're talking about these layers. So when we talk about the donor behavior, right, the ultimate person who contributes to the peer-to-peer fundraising campaign, that's a chain reaction between your organization's, fundraising behavior, your fundraising behavior as the fundraiser, the peer-to-peer fundraisers behavior, and then ultimately that donor's behavior. So how we communicate and how we transmit energy through our organization, how we talk about things and how we build identity and belonging, all of which we'll talk about throughout our time together today. Those things, they have a ripple effect, right? It's like throwing a pebble in a pond and watching the ripples move out. And so it can be easy when we're feeling stressed sometimes to rush through how we're communicating with our peer-to-peer participants. And we're just like, okay, just like get this email out to your network or get this out to all your supporters, or you got to do this now. And then that kind of frantic, stressed energy just translates right to them. And that's not what's going to allow them to really authentically and powerfully engage their networks in an excited way. And so it's really important to sort of understand this chain reaction. And one of the things that I'm talking about in this chain reaction that I'm alluding to is our energy, right? And in my framework and in how I talk about leadership and fundraising styles, I am rooted in my executive coaching experience with IPEC, who has something called an Energy Leadership Index assessment. And inside that assessment, there are these two types of energy that they talk about: catabolic energy and anabolic energy. Catabolic energy is really draining, resisting, contracting energy. It's where we have a lot of tunnel vision. We don't see a lot of ways forward. We can feel really at the effect of our life, right? Sometimes right before a meeting, we feel that. Or if you ever have had a draft email in your draft folder and you're really struggling to click send, right? That's sort of an example of how catabolic energy can show up in our fundraising. Anabolic energy, on the other hand, is fueling, expanding energy. It's really rooted in joy and connection and opportunity. We see a prism of opportunity, and how we're showing up to our peer-to-peer fundraising, whether it's with a lot of catabolic energy or a lot of anabolic energy, that has a huge effect on what type of pebble we're throwing in that pond. So I want you to just take a really quick moment and reflect for yourself, thinking about, if you've done peer-to-peer before, what are the elements of peer-to-peer fundraising that might activate some of your catabolic energy? What has that felt like in your body? How has that influenced your results? I just want you to sort of like take these concepts in and start to recognize when they might happen for you. And then I want you to do the same thing around anabolic energy. When do you experience anabolic energy, that like flow state, fueling, excited, connected energy? What does that feel like in your body? And how does that ultimately influence your performance and how you show up and how you connect with those peer-to-peer participants? I know I'm giving you like a split second to do this while we're together today, and maybe this is something you come back to in the slides or in the recordings, but this is really important because awareness of our energy gives us really important information. It gives us really important information about where we're at, how we're showing up, and maybe why we're not seeing the results that we ultimately want to be seeing with our peer-to-peer participants. Because if we're showing up with a bunch of catabolic energy to how we're trying to engage them, to engage their people, that's the energy that's transferring, and then we really see that reflected in our results. So we don't have time to talk about this today, but this type of anabolic and catabolic energy exists on a spectrum. There are 7 levels, 7 styles of energy, but for now, it's really just about starting to understand how that energy and when that energy is showing up in you. Because if we don't bring that awareness to our work, this is what happens, right? You can put together the best peer-to-peer fundraising strategy that is out there, but if you don't address some of those limiting beliefs around what you feel like fundraising is, what might be holding you back from engaging people or storytelling, then this is what ultimately happens. Only a tiny % of that strategy gets through. So I just want to say, today I'm going to be probably talking about different things related to peer-to-peer than you've potentially ever heard before, right? Like when I Googled, okay, what do most people talk about on peer-to-peer webinars? I was like, yeah, okay, here's like the nuts and bolts of like how you might structure this or how you might do this. But is this what's actually happening when people do peer-to-peer fundraising? And the reality is no. And the reason for that is because of this. And so the things that I'm going to be talking about today, in addition to sort of the strategic side of how you engage your participants and then help them engage their networks and connections, is really helping you understand, okay, after we hang up this webinar, where are the places that you might experience resistance? Where are the places that your fundraisers, your peer-to-peer participants might experience resistance? And how do we make sure you have some tools to overcome those so that you can actually implement the whole strategy? Okay. So Are you with me? Are you with me? I see that you're all here. The chat is quiet. Oh, Tim, it's so good to see you. But are you with me? I have 5 tips around peer-to-peer fundraising that I want to go through with you. And we're going to talk about why a supporter becomes a peer-to-peer fundraiser for your organization, and then ultimately how to leverage those reasons both to engage new peer-to-peer participants and fundraisers, and how to cultivate, steward, support them throughout their time doing peer-to-peer so that you retain them. When I think about retention from a peer-to-peer standpoint, the retention number that is the most important to me is retention of your peer-to-peer participants. Retention of your peer-to-peer participants, meaning the people doing the peer-to-peer fundraising, okay? Retention of those participants year after year is the most important way to tell, did you do all the tips that we're going to go through today, right? The retention of the donors that participate, that give to those campaigns, to your participants' campaigns, that is less important to me, because whether or not, because their sort of networks can change year to year. Some of their networks are giving just because of their relationship to that person, not necessarily because of alignment to your organization. That's okay, right? Because social connection and networks are really important to us. So that's okay. It's not about every single one of those donors being converted into your core people, because they're not all your core people, and that's okay. What's really critical is retention around your peer-to-peer participants. Do they want to participate in peer-to-peer fundraising for your organization year after year after year? And so we're going to really focus on how you ensure that. Okay, Vincent, oh, it's so good to see you here too. Okay, everyone, y'all ready to go through? Can you just write yes in the chat so that I know you're here and you're ready to go? And we're going to talk through these 5 different things. Okay, thank you. All right, we're here. I'm not alone in the virtual abyss. Okay, amazing. So, in order for your donors to become strong peer-to-peer fundraisers, they need to, these are 5 things: know why your organization is different. 2, understand why their involvement matters. We're going to talk about all 5 of these. So if you're like, wait, what does this mean? Don't worry, this is what we're doing. 3, they need to see the impact of the organization and be able to talk about it. And I will explain how you do that. 4, they need to have a simple way to engage and get support around their discomfort and fears with the fundraising, okay? And then 5, be reinforced and celebrated. There's a lot around sort of the gamification of peer-to-peer, but I'm going to talk about sort of some of the brain science behind that and how you think about that in terms of your design. Okay, great. Thanks, Susan. Thanks, everyone, for chiming in. I'm super glad that you are with me. I'm going to take a quick sip. Okay, so number 1, making it clear why your organization is different. So oftentimes when we start peer-to-peer fundraising campaigns, we want everyone to participate as a peer-to-peer fundraiser. And so we are a little bit afraid of coming on too strong about whatever it is that we are either fundraising around or what the campaign is rooted around. And because we're like, well, what if that makes some people not want to participate in this? And so we keep things really neutral. But the reality is that actually just means that we're bland. And so we try to be for everyone, and we actually end up being for no one. Becoming a peer-to-peer fundraiser, being power partners with you, depends on really clear alignment. And so that means you being really clear about exactly what makes your organization different, standing out with that brand positioning and that differentiation, and then why it's what is different about partnering with you or participating in this campaign with you. And this is not about being like so neutral and figuring out like, okay, how can we say this in the way where we get the most peer-to-peer fundraisers? Because if you are casting a net that wide around your peer-to-peer fundraisers where you're really trying to attract anyone possible. It's going to be really hard for the right people to identify that they're in the right place and that raising money for your organization is really the thing for them. And I'll talk about this a little bit more in some of the other tips. But the first piece is just really differentiating your organization. You want to ask yourself, like, okay, they could raise money for any organization that does cancer research. Why should they do it for ours? What makes it different? What makes us different? Okay, those are the very first things that you want to ask yourself to start to build your communication around inviting people to participate in the campaign. The other thing that I'll say is that if you are just bland and neutral and trying to cast the widest net, it's going to make all of your follow-up communications a lot more complicated as well. If you can be really clear who the right people are to do this with you, and you can be really clear about what makes your organization different and where that match happens, that's going to help you like build a lot more cohesion and belonging and connection throughout the entire campaign. Okay. So the first tip is like, make it clear what makes you really different. Do not be for everybody. You will be for no one. Okay. The other piece here is showing why their involvement matters and why now. So this is still kind of related a little bit to the last piece, right? When you're trying to figure out like what makes you different and who are the right people for you, you sort of have two options, right? I talk about this in terms of like lights, right? You can either be a torch or a laser. You'd be like, over here, we do cancer research, right? Or you can be really, really specific. We are an organization that prioritizes pediatric cancer research for kids who are dealing with X, Y, and Z, and parents doing blank. The folks who are the most closely like aligned with us care deeply about X, Y, and Z, and this campaign is rooted in our goal of impact. Okay, the more clear you can be, if you are clear about that, and the reason why we think you should be involved is because we know you care about X, Y, and Z. The more you can be that specific and that clear about that, that's how people know that you're talking to them. Okay, because if we're just like, imagine you're out in a field and you're like waving a torch around, right? And there's a helicopter above and they're like, is that for us? Like, is that person like talking to us? But if you have a laser, you point it right at that helicopter, they know, ooh, they're flagging us, right? So in your communication, in your messaging, this is the same choice that you have to be able to make, right? You need to identify the people who are aligned with your organization and point that laser at them kindly, right? Because your mission is a part of their identity. And a core human need is to have our identity validated. So the question is, why them? Right? And you want to personalize this at scale. Why them? Why should they, specifically them, participate in this peer-to-peer campaign with you? And so this personalization, you might not have the capacity to do one-on-one outreach, inviting people to participate in your peer-to-peer campaign. If you do that. Depending on the size of your organization, if you can write individual emails to some of your donors, to some of your supporters to say exactly why you want them involved in this campaign, where you see the alignment, what's going to make this different, all of those things, please do that. But if you cannot do that, then personalize at scale, right? There are still ways that we can personalize even through like mass marketing, right? So instead of saying like, hey, we need peer-to-peer fundraisers for this upcoming thing, we wanted to reach out to you today because you blank. Right? And if you segment your audience and you're speaking directly to how they're aligned with your organization, you can still do this. And that's how you point that laser at them in really friendly ways. And I want to say a little something about this. Sometimes I think because we're afraid of rejection, or we're afraid that somebody might be mad at us for inviting them to participate in this way, we do things like, we need peer-to-peer fundraisers for, because really what we're sort of getting out of is that super direct ask. And it makes perfect sense that you feel a level of vulnerability when you're really explicit about your ask, but it is way less effective to do something like that. And so acknowledge and validate your feelings that like it feels really scary to make this one-to-one ask or this much more personalized invitation to be a peer-to-peer fundraiser. But then acknowledge and validate those feelings and then do it anyway, because the reality is that's what's actually going to get people to sign on and sign up and become a part of it. Because it's all about, for your peer-to-peer participants and supporters, it's all about belonging and memory, right? So in every way that we show up as fundraisers, as the peer-to-peer organizers, we want to be cultivating and cementing belonging and memory. And the more specific we are in those ways, the better we do that. The other thing that you need to really answer for these folks is, for your peer-to-peer supporters, is why now? Why now? Why are you asking them to be involved in a peer-to-peer campaign now? And there's a lot of, sometimes like clickbaity urgency in fundraising, and that is not what I teach or what I subscribe to. So how do you create that sort of like why now moment for your participants? It's through relevance. So relevance creates urgency. Okay, I'm gonna say that again. Relevance creates urgency. So why now should this very specific person or segment become a participant in your peer-to-peer fundraising campaign? How does it have to do with their identity? How does it build belonging and positive memory for them? And how does it help you both achieve your shared goal of blank, right? So relevance creates urgency. And why now? Why now? And why now cannot be because it's the end of the fiscal year or because it's Giving Tuesday. The why now has to be related to impact. It has to be relevant to their core motivators and core drivers around being involved in your organization in the first place. Okay. 3, do you suggest making a targeted list of potential peer-to-peer fundraisers? 100%. 100%, right? Because the way I'm talking about like the retention, the prioritization of peer-to-peer is not the widest net possible. Who cares if you have 25 peer-to-peer fundraisers who don't really like set up a page and then don't do anything? Like, how does that help you? Right? Wouldn't it be so much better to have 10 peer-to-peer fundraisers that are incredibly active and engaged and sharing best practices and community and problem solving together and doing a bunch of outreach and really being ambassadors and advocates? So you want to be specific and you want to be clear and targeted. And if you have the ability to create that targeted list, you want to do it. And then if you have the ability to reach out to them one-on-one, you want to do that too, right? All these things, all these tips have to scale in terms of your capacity and your data. So not everybody here necessarily knows how to make that list necessarily, or who they would prioritize on that list, or maybe they don't have a list yet because you're brand new and you're thinking about doing this for the first time. So I don't want you to feel like that's a barrier, but if you have the capacity and capability to do that, you definitely want to do that. Okay. Number 3. You want to help them, your peer-to-peer participants, see the impact of the organization and the how. And you want to do this at the beginning in terms of how you're engaging them in the campaign in the first place. And this is a huge piece of how you keep them engaged and motivated during your time together as well. So you need to be more specific about the way you talk about your organization. And again, this helps by being very specific around who is in alignment with this campaign in the first place. How do people know that they're in the right place, that they're the right participant, that this organization is the right thing for them to be activating their network around, okay? And because you've done that up front, you can actually be a lot more explicit throughout all of your communication and engagement throughout the entire campaign. So a lot of times when I see people reaching out to their peer-to-peer fundraisers, I'll see statements like this. I know everyone here cares about the mission. Okay. Tell me if you feel something when you hear that sentence. I know everyone here cares about the mission, right? If I said to you, I know everyone here cares about the mission of my business, like, would you really know what I was talking about? Or would that make you feel any sort of way? Like that, when we're really, like, we are so deeply embedded in our work and in our missions and in our vision that we say statements like that because maybe that would be enough for us about our own organization, but that's actually not what builds identity or belonging or connection or helps other people know that they're in the right place. A lot of us have been taught this very basic kind of like know, like, trust, right? If you've never heard of know, like, trust before, it comes from corporate marketing, but it's the idea that in order for anyone to buy anything or donate to any organization, right, they have to know, like, and trust us. But even this is way too kind of like surface level, right? Because we're like, no, we'll tell them our mission statement. Like, we're going to be people pleasers and perfectionists, and we're going to always do everything right, right? Trust. Okay, we won't talk about overhead, right? We do these in these surface level ways. This is not what actually builds real relationships or connection or any of those things. What I teach inside my work is what I call Know, Like, Trust 2.0. So knowing your organization is about real stories and real people. You don't have to associate the names or the pictures. You can protect identity and privacy, but we can tell the difference between a real story and a fabricated story, right? So people start to know your organization inside and out the more real we're storytelling. The second piece to that is that like is really built through vulnerability and respecting the relationship, right? And this is true. We're going to talk about some of the fears that your peer-to-peer fundraisers might experience and how you sort of can build. Like, I think like is also not just about you being vulnerable, but you giving your peer-to-peer fundraisers space to be vulnerable themselves too, to say, hey, this feels scary, or hey, I'm not sure about this thing. That's going to build that deeper like, right? And then trust is about sharing challenges and mistakes. Yes, in peer-to-peer fundraising, do we want to be gamifying it a little bit? Do we want to be sharing successes and celebrating, peer-to-peer fundraisers when they get their first 10 donations and all the things that you see in sort of most of the recommendations around peer-to-peer fundraising? Definitely. But we want to let them in. What you're saying to your peer-to-peer participants is like, you're a part of our inner circle, right? You are a part of making this happen, not just through your own giving, not just through, your own participation in the organization X, Y, and Z, but because you're activating your community, you're activating your network, you're really an ambassador for this work. And so treat them like that in all the ways. We can't just tell people, oh, you're super important to us, when we're asking them to ask for money, and then not support that relationship by being open and honest with them, right? And letting them in and being vulnerable and sharing, okay, this thing didn't go the way we thought it was going to go. And so here's how we're adjusting, or can we bring our heads together around this, right? And so we'll talk about perfectionism a little bit later, but that's one of the sort of like, things we have to put down in order to really be able to do this. Another thing that I really recommend around trust building is what I call operational transparency. So how many, you can tell me in the chat, like, yes, you've used a car ordering service or whatever, Uber, Lyft, whatever it is. So maybe you've noticed over the last really few years how those apps have changed, right? In the past, it used to say like, yes, you have a car coming or something like that. But then a lot of us started to experience challenges, right? The car wasn't showing up, or the car was a lot later than we thought it was going to be. And we started being like, oh wait, like, where is it? Is it coming? Should I order? Should I cancel it? Should I order a new one? Tell me if you've had that, remember that sort of uncertainty a few years ago. And what these apps have started to do is they've started to do something called giving us operational transparency. Now, when we open a car ordering app, right, a few things happen. It tells us we are looking for a driver, and you see that thing scanning, right? And then it's like, we will find a driver for you in 1 minute. It's coming, right? And then it's like, okay, we found a driver for you. Here's where it is. We're going to let you watch that driver get all the way to you. And we're actually even going to tell you if they have a stop before getting to you. Okay. What are they doing? They are building trust that that car is coming through something called operational transparency. Now, do I think you all have Lyft and Uber app like creation capabilities? No, but there's something to be learned here from how we let our donors in to the process that is happening behind the scenes, right? And I've seen organizations do a great job of this when they're doing things like, getting computers to a rural village somewhere, and they are videoing just with their little cell phones, like the process of picking up the computers from this thing and flying on the airplane, and then, taking the truck through the desert to the village, right? So think about the ways that you can create operational transparency, both for your peer-to-peer participants, but then also for what your peer-to-peer participants can use with their donors and their networks and their connections. Help give them vehicles for storytelling through operational transparency. This is going to build trust between those donors and their friends and your peer-to-peer participants, and between your peer-to-peer participants and you as an organization. So it's a double whammy in a really positive way. Okay, number 4. You guys with me? Y'all still here? Okay, we're going through number 4. This is, for years, I only spoke virtually. And so I think I was a lot more like, aware that people were with me in the virtual abyss. And now that I speak more in person, sometimes I'm like, all right, everyone's still here. Like, have you muted me? And you're doing something else. Okay, cool. All right, so I'm gonna take another sip and we're gonna talk about number 4, which is giving people an easy way to participate in peer-to-peer fundraising campaigns. So a lot of what we've been talking about is how you motivate peer-to-peer fundraisers, peer-to-peer participants, and how you help those participants motivate their friends and community and network. Remember, it's a little bit meta, right? There are these concentric circles. So I'm teaching you how to do it with your peer-to-peer participants, but the same strategies apply to your peer-to-peer participants and how they do it with their network and connection. So you can also teach them these strategies that we're going over today as well. So what I want to help you understand here is what gets people to take action. So what gets your peer-to-peer, what gets your donors to say yes to participating in a peer-to-peer campaign as a participant? And then also, of course, what gets their friends and networks to participate in their campaign? So for any action to take place, 3 things need to come together in any given moment: enough motivation to take that action, the ability to take that action, and a prompt to take that action, okay? And so I studied habit and behavior design under Dr. BJ Fogg. This happens on a continuum. So in order for a prompt to work, right, a prompt would be that invitation, the call to action. In order for that prompt to work, the person has to have enough motivation and the ability to take that action, right? So an example I often give is like, I can be so motivated around a cause. It can be my number 1 priority. But if somebody asked me to give $1 million to that cause, I cannot do it. I do not have the ability. No matter how high my motivation is, I do not have the ability to do it. If you motivate everybody around doing peer-to-peer fundraising, but you do not give them a technology tool that allows them to do peer-to-peer fundraising for your organization, no matter how motivated they are, they cannot take the action, okay? So we always want to be thinking about, are we motivating folks appropriately? That's a lot of what we've been talking about, building identity and belonging and connection, all of those things. And then are we giving people the ability to take the action that we're asking them to take, right? One of the things that I really want to help you understand related to this model is one of the things that happens on the motivation line. So typically when people talk about habit and behavior design, they're actually like kind of hyper focused about ability. And they're like, okay, we're always making the action easier to do. We're giving people things in bite-sized pieces. And yes, do all of those things 100%, right? And this is like a great way, like QGive can help from a like technical standpoint and all of those things. But in addition to the ability line, when it comes to fundraising, the motivation line is actually more important than with a lot of other behaviors, because hope drives motivation up and fear drives motivation down. So I'm going to say that again. Hope drives motivation up and fear drives motivation down. And fundraising is scary. Fundraising involves fear. Period. End of story. I have never met anyone who has said that that is not true, at least a little bit for them. And for your peer-to-peer participants, for those fundraisers, it is significant, okay? Most of them are not professional fundraisers. Some of them have never fundraised before for their organizations. It is scary. It is scary. They are so afraid. Are my friends going to be mad at me? Oh my gosh, I asked my friends for this last year. What are they going to think about me doing it again this year? So and so's not going to like me if I bring this up. Oh, they think I only talk about this thing, right? Like there is so much negative chatter that we experience around fundraising, and it is so important to recognize that that is happening to your peer-to-peer participants. We often say, "Oh, this is so simple," right? Or this is so easy. We're giving you swipe copy. You just have to send this email out to your friends and family. You just have to send this email. We've made it so easy. We have not made it easy. We have made it simple. We have made the task simple, but those are not the same thing, because easy is related to how we feel taking that action. So we have made the task much more simpler. We have addressed it on the ability line by giving our participants email copy that they can send out to their friends and family. I'm not saying don't do that. Absolutely 100% do it. Make it as simple as possible. But that is actually not necessarily making it easier for them if they have fear and discomfort around fundraising. Okay. And this distinction is so important to understand. Okay. So how can you make actions simpler and easier? Okay. One of the main pieces here is what we talked about at the beginning around the cognitive behavior loop and the thoughts and the beliefs and how they inform our emotions, and then ultimately how we show up and our results. Understanding that this is happening for every single one of your peer-to-peer participants is really, really critical. And that them not taking action isn't because they don't want to necessarily. It isn't because you didn't provide them with enough templates or tools or any of those things. It might be really, really rooted in fear. And this is important to understand because a lot of times in peer-to-peer campaigns, and I think I saw a question about board members somewhere, and we'll have Q&A in a few minutes, but this is really important to understand because a lot of times what happens when people are afraid is they ask for more resources. They're like, oh, I'll be able to do this as soon as you give me a different image for that, or as soon as you make this change to this swipe copy, or if you just give me this one other thing, then I'll be ready to email my network. And so you go and you create that thing and you give it to them, and they still don't get over the action line. Right? Like this is when I see organizations obsessing over impact reports and on revision like 72, and the board members are like, no, I'll share it with my network. But as soon as you fix that one thing about this one thing, okay, what is happening there is not related to that impact report. It is not related to that swipe copy. It is not related to that. It is related to their fear taking the action. And so, yes, you need to make things simple for your folks to do. And you need to make it easier by giving people space to talk about their fears and their resistance related to fundraising. And I'm going to give you a tip. I don't have a slide for it here, but one of the most important things we can do when people are feeling discomfort fundraising is acknowledge and validate their feelings, right? Acknowledging and validating somebody's feelings actually helps them move out of catabolic energy into anabolic energy. And I think sometimes we're afraid of validating people's feelings because we think then we're sort of like making it true that they should be scared to fundraise and then they won't do it. But the opposite is true. Acknowledging and validating somebody's feelings, or saying something like, yeah, you know what? I feel nervous too when I send out fundraising emails. Like that's a totally normal emotion to feel. It doesn't mean you're doing something wrong, and it doesn't mean that you're bad at this. Actually, it's just a very vulnerable thing for us to do. Here's some things that I do to help myself get over, the action line, even when I'm feeling scared and vulnerable. I think about a story of blank where this and this and this happened because of our fundraising. That gives me hope, and that helps me get over the action line, even though I feel scared about X, Y, and Z, right? And so that type of openness, that type of communication, that's actually going to really help your folks be able to persevere. Because otherwise, when we think, oh, so and so is so confident at fundraising. Like, I wish I could be a good fundraiser like them, but I don't feel that way. So I better, like, I can't do this, right? When we don't normalize the discomfort, when we don't normalize those things, then people just think they're bad at it when they feel that way. And then they continue to not take action. Okay. And so both normalizing it up front and in your sort of dissemination of information or your trainings with them to create space and opportunity to talk about this. And then also be prepared along the way, because I don't know about you, but as a fundraiser, I certainly got, mean emails once in a while or a snide comment here or there that really would throw me off and make me question, like, is it okay what I'm doing here? I remember I wrote about this in my book, but I remember one time at my daughter's daycare, like family day, a grandfather asked me like what I do for work. And I told him I was a fundraiser for a diabetes education and advocacy organization. And like his response was, "Don't ask me for money." And I was like, "What? Like, what are you talking about?" But those comments like that we experience as fundraisers, they really impact our cognitive behavior loop. And your peer-to-peer fundraisers, your peer-to-peer participants are likely going to experience maybe one of them, but they could hyper fixate on them. It could drive their motivation way down, and they could stop future action unless we create the space and the opportunity to talk about these things, to connect with us around them, to know that it's normal to feel them, etc. So I'm not saying you have to give all the like worst case scenarios right up front when you're training people, but be prepared to talk about it with them, and being open about your own vulnerability, your own discomfort, your own fears sometimes really creates space for them to know it's okay to feel that way, and they can still really be a great peer-to-peer participant anyways. Okay, I want to get through this last one so that we have plenty of time for Q&A. I'm seeing that number tick up over there. So the fifth tip here is around ensuring that there's reinforcement and celebration. So your peer-to-peer fundraisers want connection, and connection happens through touch points, and we want them to create connection. So in order for them to create connection, they need to feel connected, right? And so you want to track the connection points that you're facilitating throughout this process, right? You want to figure out your communication plan with your peer-to-peer fundraisers. You want to identify the moments that matter that you want to be tracking. Don't just track the money. Don't just track the money. You need to be tracking these communication points, the behaviors that you're taking as fundraisers. You want to make it as easy to update as possible and create ongoing rituals or group habits that help your peer-to-peer supporters, help your peer-to-peer participants connect with each other. I did a really interesting podcast interview recently where I learned that when our motivation starts to wane. So in the middle of a campaign, right? The beginning of the campaign, our motivation is high. The end of a campaign, our motivation is high. In the middle, there's a dip, right? This is very, very normal. We should not always be the hare. Sometimes we're the tortoise, right? That is normal. Motivation I can't go into it, but it waves. So what happens though, is that when we're in the tortoise phase, we start to doubt ourselves. This is a very normal thing for both you and for your peer-to-peer participants. When we doubt ourselves, our natural human inclination is to disconnect. We do not want to be exposed to stimuli that remind us that maybe we're not doing as well as we think we should be doing, right? And so that actually pulls us to disconnect from each other. But what we need at that moment in order to stay motivated and to keep going is to be connected. So the more you can get people to commit to connection points at the beginning when their motivation is high, certain meetings throughout the campaign, sort of having that accountability throughout the campaign, that's going to ensure that even when they're feeling a little bit uncomfortable, they're going to still come to those things. And that connection to each other and to you and to your organization, that's going to help them move through the tortoise motivation phase and that dip. Habits are cemented when we celebrate the behavior instead of the outcome. So the other thing you can do to help people stay motivated in that dip to make sure they come to those meetings is to be celebrating the actions that they take. So maybe they don't feel like they're doing as well as they should from a monetary standpoint, but they've already sent out those 3 emails that you gave them to send out. Celebrate the behaviors that they're taking. Celebrate the actions that they're taking. That is how we reinforce their behavior. And then when you come together in community, you want to practice shine. You want to celebrate the actions that people are taking. You want to prioritize future actions as a group. Make sure you have some rituals around how shine is given and that you're tracking that it has been given together. Okay. One thing I just had to say, because we cannot leave without this. Nothing kills peer-to-peer fundraising momentum like perfectionism, okay? Perfectionism leads to fear of failure, lack of adaptability, decreased motivation, and lack of collaboration. We can say to our peer-to-peer fundraisers, to our peer-to-peer participants, it's okay to make a mistake. It's totally okay. Just get that out there. Just talk to that person. You don't have to be perfect. But then if they watch us holding ourselves to perfectionist standpoints, if they watch us beating ourselves up about a mistake that we made, they are not going to believe that they do not have to be perfect. And so the perfectionist culture starts with you. It really starts with your organization culture around it. But I want to make sure that you fundraisers understand that the perfectionism inside of you is going to translate to your peer-to-peer participants if you don't address it. So here are some ways to address perfectionist tendencies: setting more realistic expectations, making actions and behaviors smaller, tracking progress of behaviors instead of outcomes, right? Don't just track the money, creating a culture of feedback and learning. So let's say you guys wrote some swipe copy, everybody sent out their first email and it did not work. How are you going to address that as a group in a way that continues to build safety and connection and relationships instead of having everyone freak out that it wasn't good enough and that they weren't good enough and that maybe they did something wrong and they weren't perfect enough, right? So create a culture of feedback and learning, figure out how you adjust and pivot together, celebrate failure, and like I said, demonstrate self-compassion, because you cannot say, this is a place to make mistakes and then not allow yourself to make mistakes. Doesn't work that way. Does not work that way. Okay, here are the 5 primary tips that we talked about today in terms of what is going to motivate, draw in, and get your peer-to-peer participants to engage. Knowing why your organization is different, understanding why their involvement matters, seeing the impact of the organization and being able to talk about it. That's where that operational transparency piece really comes in. Having a simple way to engage and get support around their discomfort and fears, right? Making it simpler and easier, and then be reinforced and celebrated. If you are new to my work and you want to be in community with other people who use tips like this in their fundraising, this is my free community, whatthefundraisingcommunity.com. That's the name of my podcast. You can join in, it's totally free. And you can meet other fundraisers who are using these practices in their day-to-day. And then here are other ways to connect with me as well. I'd love to hear from you. And now we can do questions.
Thank you so much, Mallory. That was fantastic. A ton of content. Really,
Thank you.
Great.
Yes, I know. I always go a little overboard, but I want to give you guys all the things.
No, you were great. Can you explain what SHINE stands for? I think you mentioned that in one of the last slides. I made a question about that.
Yes, yes. Okay, so SHINE is a term from Dr. BJ Fogg around habit and behavior design. And SHINE is any type of celebration of the behaviors that we took. And celebration does not have to be big. Oftentimes, a lot of people are like, oh, I have to give someone a gift for taking an action. No, SHINE can be, hey, I saw you do that thing and I bet it was scary. Good job. Also, SHINE is not just external, it is inside your head. So let's say you experienced a lot of doubt about emailing your peer-to-peer participants today, but you did it anyway. Taking that moment to be like, good job, Mallory. I know that was scary. You did it. In your head, that is SHINE. And that's actually what reinforces us continuing to take behaviors like that.
Okay, that's great. Another question, and I think I may already know the answer to this one. Do you think this lesson can be used as a board training?
100%. And 100%, right? This is related to everything. And that's why I was sort of saying it's these concentric, meta circles of how these tips apply to everything. They apply to us as fundraisers, they apply to our board members, they apply to our peer-to-peer participants, all of those things. And both are about what's happening inside of us and how we talk to other people about these things. And I just want to say, in particular, all of these things, of course, matter to your board members, and you're just sort of meeting them at the point that they're at. So, for example, when board members become more disengaged, helping them understand why their particular involvement matters and that why now for them in that moment, that can be really helpful for them. having conversations around fundraising discomfort, super, super, super helpful for board members, super helpful for board members. Nobody wants to talk about it, right? And we want to pretend like we're so confident, so we should never tell the board that we feel nervous too. But actually, in doing so, we remove a lot of the barriers to their participation.
That's great. Similarly, do you think that boards that encourage grants versus individual giving, do you think that connects back to fear? Or is
Oh
one
my
ability?
gosh, I just wrote about this in my book. That's so funny. I literally just wrote about these paragraphs in my book the other day. 100% we apply to grants because of fear. We prioritize grants over other types of fundraising because of fear. And here's what I think that is related to. Not if we're really aligned with the organization, we have a relationship there, all those things. But that open portal, that invitation to talk about money makes us feel so much safer and so much more comfortable than reaching out to someone that we're afraid we've like, crossed some bridge, right? And we're like, oh, like maybe they don't want to hear from me, or maybe they don't want to talk about money, or that's going to make us uncomfortable. And so, yes, like in the book, I talk about an organization that was spending thousands of hours a year applying to grants with a 2 to 3% conversion rate on them, but they kept doing it because they were afraid of the vulnerability involved in other types of fundraising. So yes, I think it's why it's encouraged. Yes, I think it's why it happens. If this is you and you feel like I gave you a little gut punch, I just want to say this is totally normal. Totally, totally normal. Of course, it feels safer to submit to an open portal than to reach out to someone cold. Of course, but that is not what creates alignment. Alignment is about so much more than just that person has money and we need money, right? That's not actual alignment. And so we waste a lot of time, I think, because of that fear.
Yeah. Another question here. And by the way, I know we're getting close to the top of the hour. For everyone still on the call, I want to reassure you, you will get an email with the recording and extra resources tomorrow. So don't worry, we've got lots of great content coming your way. Question time. I had a member from our development and events committee remove themselves because they were uncomfortable soliciting for donations for auctions or asking for donations for our signature events. What is best practice for sharing ways to raise funds without making them feel uncomfortable?
Oh, okay. Okay. So this is a really big question to try to answer in 3 minutes, but here's the thing. First of all, you are not necessarily going to be able to manage or everybody's discomfort related to money. Our feelings about money and fundraising, some of them can be addressed somewhat quickly in the cognitive behavior loop, in the way that we talk about fundraising, in acknowledging and validating our feelings, all of those things. But sometimes, I just don't want to like oversimplify. Sometimes our relationship to money is due to like our own, growing up with material scarcity in our lives or trauma that we've been through. And so we cannot always just like correct it with the strategies. We can take care of maybe like 80% of it with the types of strategies that I'm talking about. So I just don't want to give you an unrealistic expectation that you can always control how other people feel about their discomfort. But the thing that I would encourage you to do is to talk about it, to say like, hey, what are the things that make you uncomfortable? Like, what are the pieces that when you feel the most resistance to taking action, like what's happening? Have you ever had an experience where you were fundraising for something and it felt really good? What was that like? How did that feel? Like, what were some of the tools that you had in that moment that really helped you overcome that discomfort? Like, explore that with them, and then acknowledging that, like, normalize. Like, it makes perfect sense to me that like you feel discomfort fundraising. I'm wondering, like, is there any opportunity here for us to both like support you around the areas that you feel the most uncomfortable and find the type of fundraising that could feel good and exciting to you? And so I think that's a conversation. It's a little bit different for everybody. But I think, without knowing that person and exploring that with them, it's hard to say what to do to help them overcome it.
Yeah, that's really good. I think we've got time for one more here. If you don't have a specific campaign occurring right now, would you still engage your peer-to-peer fundraisers together to create a sense of community?
Yeah, I think so. I think yes, I think absolutely any chance to build community and connection is a good one. But I think you have to be clear about the why and the why now and what exactly you are sort of providing them with in that moment. If it's like, hey, you all have helped raise money for our organization in the past. We don't have a campaign going on right now, but we're interested in starting to set up like a monthly Zoom call to bring you all together to help you get to know each other. On those calls, we're going to share some recent updates that have been happening with the organization and more about like you're going to do that operational transparency piece and help build community and connection and belonging. Like do that, but be clear about why you're doing that and then make it really relevant. Like where I see a lot of people kind of like set up committees and then they'd like fizzle away is because there's no like why now, right? And so that if you can't answer that question, why now, then I think it's better to not do something than to do something that's really kind of like flat and like, somewhat like, oh, we feel like we should be doing this, so we're doing it, but we don't really have a reason to do it, in case that helps.
It does, definitely. Thank you, Mallory. It was really great. Lots of information. And thank you for everybody that tuned in to today's webinar. We will be sharing a link to the recording tomorrow, as well as a few other resources and templates to help you out with your peer-to-peer fundraisers. So keep an eye on your email and we'll have those resources to you all tomorrow. We'll see
Thank
you.
you so much.
Bye.